Ladies and gentlemen, a funny thing happens when you go after Trump. There are unintended consequences that take place from doing so. So they banned his account on Facebook and Twitter, and both companies lost over $50 billion in market value within the stock market. Now you have, within the past week of trading, now you have the New York Times and the Washington Post turning on the wonderful and amazing platform. They're turning on Facebook and they're blaming that corporation for being the incubator, or how, this is the New York Times a couple hours back, how Facebook incubated the events of last week, and the Washington Post, Facebook, Sandberg defected blame for the events, but new evidence show how platform played role. Hit subscribe to this channel. This is absolutely fascinating. So I've been talking about how Facebook and Twitter are primarily Twitter. Facebook's an enormous company, but Twitter has $3.4 billion in debt. It's not growing. It's not really growing. It's not really, well, it's definitely not attracting the number of users that it wanted to. It's actually alienating 74 million supporters of President Trump. You ban the president, you're sending a message to not just 74 million Americans who voted for him, but millions around the world who also support the man. So this is just a really bad business decision, but again, the people who run these companies are billionaires. They don't care. They're also liberal. They're also Democrat. They're also Democrats, and they give money to Democratic candidates. I think Dorsey and Zuckerberg have both given money to Democratic candidates. I don't believe, if they've given money to Republicans, it's never Trumpers or Republicans in name only. There definitely, not many people are walking into the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, Facebook, or Twitter wearing a Make America Great Again hat. It ain't happening. But I want to touch upon this. Hit subscribe to this channel. Get this segment viral because, ladies and gentlemen, we're on our way to 200,000 subscribers. Once we reach 200,000, I'll be doing a lot more work on H.A. Goodman's other channel, and I'll be doing some other great things as well. There's a lot of wonderful things on the horizon. The future is bright, ladies and gentlemen, and even though times are very difficult for this country, and especially, they impeached President Trump twice. Rand Paul was right. It's an obvious racket and charade. But there were missteps that I'll talk about later in this segment that President Trump made. There are missteps, and there are mistakes that Trump supporters made that everyone around President Trump made in the past couple of months. I'll talk about that. But the interesting thing about Facebook and Twitter tanking in the stock market is that investors know long-term, especially Twitter, long-term, the platform is going to be completely irrelevant. Both platforms will be completely irrelevant. The difference is that Facebook owns a bunch of other companies. I don't think Twitter does. And Twitter is a platform based on fleeting thoughts. That's it. And that company will be a fleeting thought years from now. The interesting thing about Democrats and, well, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other publications, Media Matters, the left is going after Facebook now. And Trump isn't really doing anything, but they went after Trump. Obviously, they all blamed him for what took place, even though he used the word peaceful. Now, there shouldn't have been protests. That's number one. And the loss of life, those five people should be alive today, so I condemn what took place. There was no good. There was no... Forget about politics for a second. Those 5 people should be alive, so I categorically condemn what took place. And when you engage in that activity, you don't know what can transpire. You don't know what can take place. There are so many unintended consequences. And politically, it was an unmitigated disaster. Now there's no parlor. Now that everybody has to watch what they say even more than before. I have a database of words that I can't say, just like in the best of times, because the algorithm is omnipresent. That's why I'm so long-winded. That's why I just go on, because there's words that I can't say. Now there's a whole bunch of things we can't talk about. And this is not this is not the America that I know, but it's the America that left-leaning or Democratic, it's an America that the Democratic Party wants because they think it gives them political power. They think that they've solidified a grasp on the future of this country, or they benefit politically from suppressing emotion, not just thought. Propaganda is about emotion. It's about spewing and spreading and fomenting emotion. If watching squirrels surfing would get people to dislike Trump, they would just play that on endless loop. It's not about ideas. Nobody is going after President Trump because they don't like his policies. They don't like who he is. Maybe in the past 4 years, sure, there were moments where they didn't like his policies, but they focused on who he is, or who they think he is. And they were able to do that in cyberspace. The interesting thing, though, about Facebook and Twitter tanking, and that the interesting thing pertaining to the New York Times and the Washington Post going after Facebook now, is that they're saying that the Trump supporters on that fateful day organized and planned using the platform. Okay. The same thing happens, however, on the left. There have been $1 to $2 billion in property damage throughout the country from fiery but peaceful protests. Mostly peaceful. This is what a CNN journalist said while a building was set ablaze behind him. Or while a building was in flames behind him. And so you had about 19 people lose their lives. You had weeks on end of clashes in Portland. You had city blocks taken over in an autonomous zone in Seattle. And when they say, well, what if left-leaning protesters did the same thing? Media would champion them. Doesn't matter the background. Media would champion them. It would be completely different. Everything is suppressed and mitigated. And when Democrats or left-leaning organizations or activists engage or are linked to, let's just say, there were protests throughout the country, 14,000 arrests. There's Operation Legend, where you have a whole bunch of, well, that's William Barr's thing, but you have a whole bunch of not only illegal activity, but police buildings set ablaze. You had police, you have an untold number of law enforcement injured in clashes. This was championed by the Democratic Party. In phrase, the Washington Examiner has an article talking about highlighting the words of 6 Democratic politicians and how they championed and elevated what was going on. There was $1 to $2 billion in property damage and insurance claims. Businesses were torched. People lost their lives. One was the most horrendous things were caught on Facebook, okay, and videoed. And all of this chaos and mayhem took place, and Democrats were not outraged. They said it was a reckoning. They championed it as, well, this is Trump's America. Everything from the pandemic to the protests to the Helsinki conference, they compare it to Pearl Harbor with Putin years back. Trump never worked with Russia, but they fomented that on Facebook and Twitter, or they fomented that on Twitter. When Democrats find a story that they could spin as propaganda, they sink their teeth into it. And they don't let go for a long time. And this is a perfect example. The duplicity, the hypocrisy, the disingenuous nature of the Democratic Party is evident every single day, especially what took place last week. I condemn what took place last week. I condemn it, but I also condemn $1 billion in property damage and 19 lives over that night lost, and weeks on end of clashes where you have, I mean, it's almost like they're really good at erasing history, but they're able to do this because Facebook and Twitter are cyber realities. Okay, Twitter in particular is this cauldron, this boiling pot of discontent and absurd claims. So when AOC makes a reference to a time period that should never be equated with President Trump's tenure in office, because President Trump signed an executive order on college campuses combating anti-Semitism, presided over the Abraham Accords, did more for Israel than any American president ever. So when Arnold Schwarzenegger makes a comparison to just the most horrendous moment in human history, look up how many people lost their lives, how many people were, thousands upon thousands, were arrested simply for being Jewish. And so I can't get into it. I can't even talk about it. But for him to equate that, I mean, Yad Vashem already refuted and pretty much condemned AOC's revisionist history. I wrote about that in the Jerusalem Post. You could read my writing on hagoodman.com. And the Hill, the Huffington Post, Salon, the Federalist, the Jerusalem Post, the Roanoke Times. But the left is able to get away with this because they can erase history in cyberspace. They can make absurd claims in cyberspace because it's an alternate reality. It doesn't exist. So when you have people saying Trump is just like this person, there's no concept of history. You have to have Yad Vashem in Jerusalem saying, no, AOC, learn more about this topic. You're wrong. But it's basically blasphemy what she stated. It's like complete revisionist history. But that's the Democratic Party. And people, they're going after Facebook and Twitter. Well, they're going after Facebook and blaming Facebook for what took place. But I don't think Democrats understand that left-leaning organizations also organized and communicated and coordinated, and they do so all the time on Facebook and Twitter. And oftentimes, a tremendous amount of illegal activity and chaos and mayhem takes place after these events are organized. So they're going after Facebook now, which is an unintended consequence, a hilarious repercussion of going after Trump. So, I mean, how many people? Michael Cohen is in prison. Avenatti is in prison. You make a name for yourself by going after President Trump. It doesn't work out. Now you have Facebook condemning Trump and banning his account, and Twitter banning Trump's account, and they lost $50 billion in value, market value, and you have the New York Times and the Washington Post writing I wouldn't say hit pieces, because they actually have a valid case. It's just hilarious. The Washington Post and the New York Times actually have a valid case against Facebook. It's true. It's true. The protesters last week organized on Facebook. But what do you do now if you're Facebook? Or if you're Sandberg or Zuckerberg, what do? Do you now ban people from organizing events? This endless quest to suppress emotions and thoughts of conservatives, because that's what this amounts to. Like Mitt Romney and others, they're like, oh my goodness, I don't like Trump. They're next after Trump. Democrats would have no, let's say in another alternate reality, which would never happen, Mitt Romney becomes nominee and he wins in 2024. They didn't impeach him for putting that dog on top of his car in the cross-country trip or whatever, that trip to Canada. Remember when Mittens put his dog on top of the roof of his car? Okay, they would impeach him for that. Anything's an impeachable offense now. Like a phone conversation with a foreign leader who said, I was not pressured by anyone. They ignored Zelensky and said, yeah, Trump pressured him. We don't trust Zelensky. We don't trust the person that was allegedly pressured. That's the respect that Democrats have for world leaders and leader of Ukraine. But again, you're talking about the Democrats don't stand for ideas. They stand purely for legal graft and political power and influence. That's it. It's a business to them. Okay? Trump came into office and he's made missteps, but he was rich before politics. These people are rich because of politics. Barbara Boxer now had to register as a foreign agent. Okay? Why do you think another country would be interested in a former California senator? Why do you think another country would be interested in a former Democratic politician? But see, it's not going to work. The end of this segment is going to end with the following. Everything that's taking place right now, if you're a Democrat, if you're watching this, don't rejoice. Especially if you're on the far left, don't rejoice. Democrats, if there's a black or African American organization, political organization that, does not like the Democratic Party, or a Hispanic and Latino organization that does not like the Democratic Party or opposes President Biden, or is organizing an event against, the incoming President Biden, and if there's an Asian American organization, if there's a left-leaning organization, I should say, with people of different backgrounds or ethnicities or races, and if they don't like the incoming Democratic administration, and if they organize on Facebook, who do you think Democrats are going to go after? They're not going to go after Trump anymore because there's going to be Biden for the next 4 years. So this is a slippery slope that leads to suppression of thought and ideas on the left. The biggest obstacle Democrats have always had is the left. It's not Trump. They don't care about Trump. They're indignant that he was able to wrestle control of the United States government away from them. So, you look what happened in President Obama's administration. Look at Standing Rock. Look at Flint. Look at the organizations that are prominent now. They rose up and they were created during President Obama's administration. But they weren't a true obstacle to Democrats. When there's a left-leaning organization, whether it's led by black activists or Latino activists or Asian American activists on the far left, who do you think is going to be silenced, or who do you think Democrats are going to try to silence? So once they go after conservatives or Trump supporters, I know. I started on the left. I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an American. I was the unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. All my articles went viral. Not all, I should say. I should say a great many in 2016. And the editors at the Huffington Post and Salon and The Hill looked over and gave a stamp of approval on those articles. And I was saying, Bernie Sanders was an infinitely better candidate, and Clinton would lose. She did. And I got hit pieces written against me. They tried to silence me because, they always attack the messenger. It didn't work because I never cared about their condemnation or judgment because they lack moral authority, and if anything, they're the most duplicitous, disingenuous political side that's ever existed. But it's not gonna work out. That's my point. You know, I could have shorter segments if I would just be able to speak, but I can't because I have to watch what I say. I'm going to be watching what takes place. And it's very interesting to see this suppression, censorship, this attempt at ignoring reality and erasing emotion and sentiment and ideas from the public sphere by linking them to the horrendous actions of a tiny fraction of 74 million supporters of President Trump. This paves the way for them to just crush and pummel the left. But you see what's taking place now with Jimmy Dore. You see what's taking place. He just asked for a floor vote for Medicare for all. He called them out and said, "Look, this is what we want." And now you see you can't do that. The Democratic Party is our only source of political influence. Oh my God. And AOC said you can't do it. And Bernie said you can't do it. And other people say you can't do it. And all this. So horrible. And you don't go after Trump that way. And it's always anything but actually addressing the issue of, whoa, wait a second. You mean Democrats have no intention? I've been saying for 4 years Democrats have no intention of any of these things, really. Initially, I said, well, only Bernie Sanders could as president, but then I realized the guy was a phony and fraud. He doesn't really want to, he never wanted to really go after the Democratic Party. We all learned the hard way regarding that. Medicare for all, for example, Green New Deal, universal basic income, these aren't Democratic policies. They're not even liberal policies. They have no place in the Democratic Party. That's why Democrats don't want them. They're not Democratic Party policies. They're not liberal policies. They're Green Party policies. They're the policies and objectives of the far left. Biden has a lot more in common with Trump on those issues. A lot more. And you'll get like a watered down, student loans. Okay, that's not going to save the planet. That's not going to... So, Democrats with climate change and the Green New Deal and universal basic income and all of these, any paradigm-changing, policy objective that gets millennials or young people or the most idealistic and passionate voters within the Democratic Party or, far left, when it gets them energized, all of those ideas Democrats will crush if voters lose patience. And then they'll just delete the voters. Like they've tried to erase Trump supporters from history. And they'll say, you see what happened at that event? And they'll actually now... You see, they gave the left a free pass in the past 5-6 months. $1 billion in property damage. But it all hurt President Trump, so it's all good. It won't be fiery, but mostly peaceful then. There's people who dress in all black, which I don't understand why they're not proud to just not, why cover the face if you're actually, engaging in such an amazing act. Be proud. But anyway, that's another story. The left, when Democrats are done utilizing them for political purposes, and if they get in the Democratic Party's way, watch what these wonderful Democratic politicians do. Democrats media and the Democratic Party have one goal. It has nothing to do with their constituents. Nothing. Okay? There was a Voting Rights Amendment Act from John Conyers and Jim Sensenbrenner years back. They haven't even addressed voting rights. Notice how they're not talking about voting rights now. They're not talking about a Green New Deal. They're not talking about Medicare for all. They're not talking about universal basic income. They're not talking about voting rights or the Voting Rights Amendment Act. What else? They're not talking about reparations. They're not talking... Well, why not? Because It's President Biden now for 4 years. There's no need to talk about these things now. Because, And so what I'm trying to say is, when they're now going after Facebook for Trump supporters, utilizing the platform, it's the left that utilizes those platforms a lot more to organize and to coordinate their efforts. When Democratic politicians have had enough, or view the far left as a true obstacle, then they'll converge upon them. So, give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. I just find it very interesting that the Washington Post, the New York Times are saying, "Hey, Facebook, now what's going to happen? Well, Facebook's now going to not allow people to coordinate or organize events. Okay, that's yet another useful tool on a platform that they have to just erase simply because of Trump. At the end of the day, they're so obsessed. Their minds are so warped. They have this singular focus in trying to stop Trump that'll be their undoing politically and from a business sense. And look, you know what? The missteps President Trump's made, there were many in terms of he could have. He did so many amazing things, accomplishments, and unfortunately, people are going to try to erase them from history because of his words. And he should have realized that media and a great many voters, unfortunately, care more about words than actions. In life, you're judged by actions, not by your words. In politics, you're judged by words. In many cases, more so than actions. Anyway, I can go on forever about that. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Thank you.